Hello everyone and welcome back to Why the Hell Do We Care? Today is going to be a bit of a long one with 7 new people to talk about, with 3 Dynasty Warriors, 3 Samurai Warriors, and an original character, so let's get cooking with Gan Ning. Gan Ning joined the cast in Dynasty Warriors 2, and probably has the most weapon styles out of the cast. He originally used a scimitar, then he went to dual knives in 6, got a sickle and chain in 7, and took up the flail in 8. He loves to fight and was known for wearing bells so that his enemies could hear him coming to make fights more challenging. He was originally a bandit that came to serve under Huang Zu. However, Huang Zu refused to recognize his accomplishments, such as killing Ling Tong's father in battle, and in his frustration Gan Ning defected to Wu. He is very hot-headed and clashes with a lot of the other officers, especially Ling Tong, who understandably hates Gan Ning for killing his father. Both characters grow a lot through their rivalry and mentorship by Lu Meng. Eventually, they become good friends and protect each other's backs in battle. In 8, it could be said that the trio are the stars of the Battle of Hefei, as they hold the line to protect Sun Quan's retreat and get quite a few cutscenes featuring the 3. Historically, Gan Ning died of illness, but in Dynasty Warriors he is usually slain at the Battle of Yiling by Shimoke. Now let's see how Gan Ning's sickle style compares with Jia Xu's. Gan Ning is a power type, and as you might have guessed, shares a lot of his moveset with Jia Xu. Main differences outside of their EX attacks in R1s and Musou is that Jia Xu focuses more on swinging his sickles around him, while Gan Ning focuses on multiple hits with his C4 and has a pretty meh C6. His C3 EX attack is more Aizuno drop goodness. His ground R1 is him setting his sickle on fire and twirling it around his head for some pretty decent damage. His aerial is an okay air combo. His Musou is a great Mook destroyer as he just charges through his enemies with his sickle ablaze. His passive is efficacy, which increases damage to enemy officers. I will admit, I have a lot of preference towards Gan Ning, but a lot of that is because I like his character. Both of them are pretty good and have their own pluses or minuses, but being the Wu fan that I am, Gan Ning always wins out with me. Jing Sai was introduced in Dynasty Warriors 5 and is actually an original character based off of Lu Shan's wife, who was Zhang Fei's youngest daughter. In her debut, she mainly fought alongside Guan Ping, and the two were being called the future of Shu alongside Jiang Wei. This is around the point in the series where they started extending the game's plots beyond the major battles that were the normal endpoints of the campaigns at that point, like the battles of Wuzhang Plains and Yiling. As such, she mainly shows up in the Jing campaigns as a Shu officer alongside Jiang Wei and Guan Yu's children. She is a very strong and determined woman who fights to protect both her homeland and Lu Shan. As she is an original character, there isn't much actual history for her. Now let's see how she swords and boards with the best of them. Jing Sai is a speed type, and the best way I can describe her is beginner friendly. She has a decent attack speed and range on her weapon, and the final hit of her S-string is a ranged shockwave. Her C3 hits multiple times and is good for fighting officers. Her C4 EX attack is her crowd clearer and follows up with a buff to her stats, which can be pretty handy. Her C5 is pretty fun as she launches both herself and her opponent into the air and can be followed up with her air charge attack. Her C6 is also a good crowd clearer with a full swing all around her. Her ground R1 isn't very damaging, but it is fun as she just rides around the battlefield on her shield. Her aerial R1 is a charging attack air combo that is just alright. Her Musou is a lot like Gan Ning, with her just charging through her opponent's damaging all in her way. Her passive is speed, which boosts the stats of all speed types in the group. Jing Sai is not the best character, but she is very reliable in whatever situation you put her in. It is unknown when Zhang He was born, but he joined the cast in Dynasty Warriors 3. Originally, Zhang He served Yuan Shao, but during Cao Cao's big confrontation with Yuan Shao, Zhang He defected to join Cao Cao. Usually this is done by secretly taking out Yuan Shao's supply depot, causing him to flip out, and then Zhang He defects because he thinks Shao is not acting with grace. The Battle of Jiting is usually his big moment of glory where he surrounds the Shu officer Ma Su when he chose a poor spot to set up his main camp. He was considered to be among the top 5 generals in the Wei army. Most Dynasty Warriors fans know him as the poster child of camp. In one version of the Battle of Jiting, he starts it by giving a speech to his men while dancing around before posing and telling his men to charge, and then they all pose right back at him. Now let's see how he tears through his enemies with his giant claws. Zhang He is a wonder type and probably has one of my favorite weapon styles from Wei. He is pretty damn fast and he makes very wide swings with his claws, which despite being claws are very long. He also has an actual air combo. His C3 hits a lot of times and transitions into his EX attack where he just drills through people in midair. His C4 is an alright crowd clear but doesn't do much damage. His C5 is pretty great, hitting multiple times and knocks the opponents into the air. His C6 is his power attack with multiple hits and a big knockback at the end. His ground R1 isn't that great, just some damage. But his air R1 is a lot like Zhao Ba's and massively increases his attack speed. His Musou is an interesting one. It's kind of a long range throw where he just drills forward and the first thing he hits gets drilled into the ground. His passive is Impulse, which increases everyone's speed, which is always nice. Zhang He might not have a lot of power, but he has a lot of speed and technique working for him, which makes him fun to use in my opinion. Nene was born in 1624 AD and was introduced in Samurai Warriors 2 as a replacement for Kunoichi. She is the wife of Hideyoshi Toyotomi, who as you may recall almost became the ruler of Japan. She is known for her devotion to her husband even in the face of all of his lecherous debauchery. Obviously, she wasn't really a ninja who fought on the battlefield alongside her husband in reality. She was known for being kind and caring and even cared for the Jesuits in Japan when they were being ostracized. In the game, she was pretty much the team mom of the Toyotomi. Kiyomasa Kato, Masanori Fukushima, and Mitsunari Ishida are pretty much treated as her adopted children. She even calls some of the enemy's naughty children in need of punishment. Now let's see how she delivers her spankings. Nene is a technique type and is almost an exact clone of Kunoichi. Her S-string, C2, and C4 are pretty much the exact same attack, and of course her R1s and Musou are different. Her C3 is different with her throwing her knives like boomerangs around her instead of Kunoichi's funky combo. Her C5 and ground R1 produce clones that mimic her attacks, adding to her damage and hit count. Her aerial has her throw her knives like shuriken to drag enemies to her. Her Musou is standard samurai fare, with her rapidly throwing her knives till the meter runs out. Her passive is dexterity, which reduces damage received from enemy combos. Its usefulness is dubious since it's hard to know exactly how much is reduced at what point in the combo. I guess I prefer Nene over Kunoichi. Again, like Gan Ning, a lot of that comes from liking her character more. She has good speed and her charge attacks have some excellent crowd clearing, especially if you get enough agility stats on her weapon. That turns her C4 into something that can brutalize groups really effectively. Her clone skill really helps her damage and turns her C2 into a meat grinder, so I'd say she's pretty decent. Katsue Shibata was born in 1583 and became playable in Samurai Warriors 2 Extreme Legends. He is one of Nobunaga's loyal generals to the point that he opposed Hideyoshi's rise to power. He also has the nickname of the Devil Shibata. He is good friends with Toshiie and even works to get him reinstated to the Oda clan at the beginning of 4. Also in 4, he is given Oichi's hand in marriage by Hideyoshi in order to gain his support for his choice of Nobunaga's successor. Hideyoshi's play failed and Katsue fights him at Shizugatake, where Katsue is defeated and both he and Oichi perish. Now let's see how Katsue's dual axes compare to Zhang Liao's. Katsue is a technique type with some huge friggin' axes. His S-string is actually pretty fast and his range is decent with those big axes of his. He also hits like a truck as his axes might denote. His charge combos are alright. His C1 has some good range on it with the boomerang axes, and his C2 is an alright juggle combo. His C3 is meh, and his C4 hits like a truck. His C5 also gets some points for him showing his wrestling cred and tries to break some poor fool's back. His ground R1 is a charging attack with an explosive finish, and his aerial is exploding meteor axes. His Musou is the usual samurai fare, with multiple attacks until the meter runs out. Although his gets points for running around while doing it to wreck a lot more enemies. His passive is Fortitude, which boosts everyone's defense, which is always handy. Katsue is a lightning bruiser with a good attack speed and pretty high damage. I will admit I never really used the guy, since I never really got hands-on with him till Samurai Warriors 4, and even then there were a lot of other characters I liked more. Oichi debuted in the original Samurai Warriors game and was born in 1547. To put it bluntly, Oichi is a pretty tragic character and a feminist nightmare. She is essentially just treated as a bargaining chip to be used in political marriages. But let's face it, that time period isn't really female friendly. The games and most stories about her attempt to change this, making her a more active character and actually having feelings for both Nagamasa and Katsue. Although I think this makes things a bit awkward in the Orochi universe where Nagamasa is still alive. In her first appearance in Samurai Warriors 1, she was portrayed as very young to the point that I thought she was 12, and she still married Nagamasa Azai, which was kind of off-putting at the time for me. So let's awkwardly transition and see how she managed to weaponize hula hoops. Oichi is a speed type, and she is kind of a fake-out character. Her range changes a lot based on how many of her hoops she links together for the attack, making some of them have some pretty decent range. Her C1 is a very short-ranged attack while she tries to buzzsaw some poor fool. Her C2 is an alright air combo, but nothing special. Her C3 is okay, and the last hit has her combine 4 of her hoops for the last slash, giving it some extra oomph in range. Her C4 is a lot of spinning, which ends with her sending 4 of her hoops flying out in a very long-range attack that can honestly be hard to aim. Her C5 can only be described as her arrow flinting it on her hoops connected to thin air. Her ground R1 has her send her hoops out like very sharp wheels to hit the enemies in front of her many times. Her aerial is a mech combo. Her Musou is probably her best attack as she has her hoops orbit around her, hitting many times in all directions. Her passive is speed, which once again boosts all speed type stats. I'll be honest, I don't really like Oichi. Even though some of her attacks get longer range as they go on, you still need to get close if you want the full effect of the combo. Her speed is decent and she has some good area attacks, but they don't do much damage, so I give her a pass. Finally, we have Shuten Doji, who we have been tracking for this entire chapter now. The original Shuten Doji is a Japanese Oni who is well known for loving his booze. The original doesn't really have much bearing on our red-headed friend. I would say more, but a lot about him is pretty spoiler heavy, so let's quickly move on to his weapon demonstration. Shuten Doji is surprisingly a wonder type. When I first saw him, I thought he would be a power type, but that shows what I know. He has some good range and motions on his S-string to hit multiple enemies. The first part of his C1 hits in a good cone in front of him, but the follow-up attacks are pretty short-ranged. His C2 is an alright air combo with a big spin on his gore for the second part. His C3 is honestly kinda bad, with him slowly shooting booze out of his gourd, but it gets point for him using a booze cannon. His C4 is pretty bad in my opinion. It does hit all around him, but it does so slowly, so it isn't hard for him to get interrupted. His C5 is just him spitting booze on his enemy and then getting dizzy and falling over. His R1s are okay, but his ground has a huge startup before the fire breath so it can get interrupted, and his aerial is just okay. His Musou, while looking pretty cool, is pretty meh. It only hits a couple of times before his meter runs out. His passive is Fortitude, which once again increases the team's defense. Overall, I am really not a big fan of Shuten Doji. He is alright and can hold his own, but the windups on some of his charge attacks can get you hit, and his Musou is pretty lackluster, so use at your own risk. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thankfully, the next one will be shorter, but should be no less interesting as we get some surprising new recruits along with Zhang He. I hope you will all join me again next time.